Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as always by Mr. Tucker Hazel, and today we are here to once again test Tucker's mettle because I have come up with a topic, I haven't told him about it, and we're going to
Yes.
discuss it. And that topic, folks, relies on a rumor that I didn't read and I don't know the veracity of. But it sparked something interesting in my mind.
Okay.
I heard through the grapevine that Jeff Grubb apparently said that there's a new God of War game coming out this year.
Yeah.
And what this had me
I don't. Yeah, you're right. I heard that too, but I don't know how believable this
Yeah,
is.
it's actually ultimately besides the point because
Yeah.
I was thinking about this and I was thinking about my gut reaction to that news
Sure.
of being like, oh, another God of War game.
Yeah.
That's what was sitting with me when I heard
Sure.
that
Yeah.
information. And now I want to bring in something else, Tucker. I want to bring in the imminent launch of the Nintendo Switch 2.
Sure.
And when we think about the sort of big marquee unannounced game that everybody can't wait to see, it's a new
Yeah.
3D Mario.
Definitely.
Or if I can frame it a little bit differently, it's another 3D Mario. And what I'm curious to talk with you about today, Tucker, is what happened in the brains of the culture that Nintendo is able to continually sell new systems and get people excited on the basis of the same IP, but seemingly so few other companies are able to.
Mm.
You think about how much people complain about sequels on PlayStation platforms
Sure.
or
Yeah.
complain about the way that a platform like Xbox used to be and had for a long time the impression of being Gears, Halo, Forza, and that got tiresome. And
Yeah.
yet, that's not the case for
And yet.
Nintendo, despite the fact that their IP had been around far, far longer than the competition. Indeed,
Yeah.
largely the longest running IP in the entire industry. And
Yeah.
yet, it doesn't have, I don't think, that same fatigue on it
Mm.
that everybody else's IP does. Do you think that
Sure.
that's fair? What do you think is going on here?
Well, I think it's an interesting topic to sort of bring in the different sort of history and variety and things like spin-offs
Yeah.
and different teams being willing to experiment more with their different IP that might allow it to stick around for a lot longer. But I do want to say that I think that is only true. I think it's true depending on where you stand in
Yeah.
terms of what you're a fan of. Because you say that about God of War, but we are 7, 8 God of War games in. They have been system sellers for many generations now,
Yeah.
and a new one will be exciting, sell very well, and be well reviewed. So it's not like just because you have the gut reaction as someone who's not a fan of the God of War series that is a particularly widely held. God of War is a beloved series. They're celebrating their 20th anniversary. Like the last couple games have been nominated for Game of the Year. This is not niche or something that's going downhill in any particular
Sure.
way. And it also is important to note that there is still plenty of people, and it's impossible to quantify because we're talking about people on the internet. We have no idea who they are or like how much this vocal minority represents a larger group. But plenty and plenty and plenty of people who say the exact same thing about Nintendo games. Pokemon, Zelda, Mario, Mario Kart, Mario Party. We're on our 10th, 15th iteration of each
Sure.
of these series, and Nintendo has just been relying on these and running them into the ground and repeating, and it's always the same characters. Nintendo never tries anything new. There's still plenty of people who say those things. I don't agree with either perspective.
Right.
I personally take a much more separated stance, I guess, from like just looking at each game sort of on their own merits, as opposed to like, all right, this is X number of games. Like, well, is it doing different things? But there are definitely people saying the exact things that you feel about God of War to Nintendo games quite frequently.
Yeah, I mean, this is what's interesting to me about it because I think back to if you think about the discussion around Nintendo in a broader sense a decade ago,
Yeah.
really in the heart of the Wii U era, toward as it's been obvious for a period of time that it's a failed system, that it's got no
Yeah.
motion. I think that there was a lot of frustration there
Sure.
about the way, and we've discussed this before, the way that like the 3D Mario in that system looked very similar and was structurally very similar to 3D Land. And so
Yeah.
I think a portion of this discussion is also the moment in which it's happening.
Mhm.
Because I think that there is certainly less...
The moment in which this discussion that we're
Yeah,
having
yeah,
is happening.
yeah, I
Okay,
think-
sorry, you were still talking about Wii U, so I'm just not. I want to
Yeah,
make sure.
I think there's less. I think that there's a much less clear sense of frustration that Nintendo's just doing the same thing because everybody loves them
Definitely.
right now.
Yeah.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's a
Yeah. Yeah.
fundamental
Yeah.
difference because think about we talk sometimes about the fact that Nintendo's output of new IP has not been particularly good over
Yeah.
the last many years.
Mm-hmm.
Larger for this whole generation, it's only been edge cases, things like Ring
Definitely.
Fit, the Sports Mates, the little
Mm-hmm.
Game Builder Garage characters that nobody's considering, right?
Mm-hmm.
The new IP is sort of irreverent offbeat, largely
Yeah.
EPD4 stuff.
Stretchers. Yeah.
But we're looking down the start of a new generation, and I
Yeah.
don't really feel like you're hearing a lot of people saying, "Oh, I want a new IP from Nintendo."
Yeah.
People
Definitely.
want that next game after Odyssey. They want the sequel to Odyssey.
Mm-hmm. They want Mario Kart 9,
Yeah,
which obviously
we're
we're
getting.
seeing. Yeah, but
So you make a good point about being a thing of expectation, and there's
mm-hmm.
certainly a cyclical component to it, to where I think there's different moments when different companies are on top, different IP are more or less in
Yeah.
favor.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like Nintendo has had a unique ability to weather the storm and iterate on these
Sure.
IPs over and over and over and over again. Because if we think more about God of War, obviously there's a fundamental shift with the 2018 release, and it
Yeah.
became a pretty markedly different IP.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at something like Horizon, right?
Yeah.
The fatigue around Horizon set in
Yeah.
almost immediately.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it feels like to a degree, and to an extent, we're just talking about it in amorphous discourse. But I think it's true enough in the main that it's interesting to talk about. You have these IP from PlayStation either revitalized or new, and people are just fucking sick of them. They don't
Mm-hmm.
want another Horizon game. Anytime
Yeah.
you see something in Horizon, there's a ton of people upset. And maybe Nintendo is just in a position where they're more insulated from that because it's a more hardcore, dedicated fan base.
Hmm.
But what I want to really get to the heart of here is I think that there's something, in my view, intrinsic to the fact that Nintendo has set the expectation
Sure.
through the entirety of their history that they will always deliver these IP.
Yeah.
And they will always iterate
Yeah.
on these IP. And sometimes it'll be something new, but for the most part, you're not coming to them for a new IP. And when something like Splatoon
Sure.
hits, it's
That's a good point.
special and it's interesting.
Yeah.
But a point you make often about PlayStation that I think is really apt is that with kind of every generation, even the same teams have a new series that they
Yeah,
play around
definitely
with
true.
and they discard.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean that in a negative way. I simply mean it as, okay, we're Naughty Dog, we're done with Crash, we're on to Jack. We're done with Jack, we're on to
Yeah.
Uncharted. And so I wonder if there's a component to it there. The expectation from Nintendo
Yeah.
is never anything other than this. Do you think do you think that's a fair point?
No, I think that's definitely true
Yeah.
because I also think that same logic can be applied to many series that are not only very prolific but long lasting.
Yeah.
Is you don't expect there to not be a next Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy
Right.
or Call of Duty or these things that are obviously not from Nintendo's teams or from Capcom. You want that next Resident Evil. You want that next Street Fighter.
Yeah.
You want that next Devil May Cry. These are IP that have been going for as long or close to as long, the biggest Nintendo IP, but they have established themselves for so long, and each of these franchises have had their own internal ups and downs. I think is also might be
Yeah.
also interesting to talk about. But it is I don't know when the point is that an IP crosses over from being milked to being a mainstay. Because I do think there is a moment where people realize that this isn't something that they're just that a company isn't just burning through for a short amount of time and like getting as much juice out of before they move on to the next thing, but instead for to differing degrees, but something like Mario or Street Fighter, these are things that are here to stay.
Yeah.
They're cultural mainstays, and they within those series can be reinvented, be approached for new generations, and then people don't think they're milking Street Fighter,
Right.
Because if that were true, then people would hate Street Fighter 2 because there's like 7 versions of Street Fighter 2, and most of them came out within 6 or 7 years of each other. If that many versions of Horizon came out within that amount of time, people would hate Horizon even more, but there's just a different expectation now that like Street Fighter has been around for so long, and Horizon is at this point only a 7-year-old franchise, 8-year-old franchise, and it only has 4 games. This is not ridiculous numbers we're operating with here. And Horizon I think, is just reaching the point where, as we start to look down the barrel of more spin-offs and of multimedia adaptations, a TV show, a movie, things like that, where the iconography and mainstay cultural importance of Horizon will become cemented imminently. But it has yet to set in, because the series is still just, in reality, just a couple games.
Yeah, I mean, what it makes me think about also is the idea that, like, you could think of Guerrilla as the team that makes Horizon, right?
Currently, that's what they are.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that people often take umbrage with, especially people who are maybe longer term fans who might be wishing for a Killzone to come back or something. Yeah. But then this is where, again, I bring it into conversation with Nintendo. When we talk about the EPD groups, it's not just that we're talking about, we're not just talking about I always forget how to say her name. Kyogoku, thank you very much. Yeah. Who is the steward of the Animal Crossing series. It's not that we say, when we think about EPD 5, we think about Kyogoku and Nogami and these guys. Yeah. We're thinking about Splatoon and Animal Crossing. You see, and that's an interesting difference. With Nintendo's EPD groups, there's always an expectation that these development teams exist to satisfy these franchises. Sure. And to keep these franchises going. True.
And it is very rare, looking at the history. Important to note, EPD rules and teams and stuff did change a little bit over the course of the last 15 years. So things got shuffled around a little bit. But talking about it within those silos, it is very rare for any of these specific EPD teams to try a new IP. Of course, there are the ones that are more production houses to assist and guide external teams, external Nintendo teams. But, the last non-Mario game that EPD 8 made was their first game, Jungle Beat. I guess Captain Toad. But these things are anomalies for each of these teams. EPD 3, the Zelda team, has never made a non-Zelda game.
Yeah.
And of course EPD 5 now has 2 franchises, but for a while it was just one. They have this expectation. But one thing I think is interesting about this understanding of this team services this IP, and people kind of just understanding that that this is something you expect from Nintendo, I think also might come from the fact that most people are not aware of the team division. They think Nintendo makes these teams. They might, on a base level, understand the guy who worked on Breath of the Wild probably also worked on Tears of the Kingdom, but because Nintendo isn't very transparent about their team structure, it takes some digging and research like we have done to understand this division. I don't think there's the association with specifically EPD 8 with 3D Mario as there is with Guerrilla to Horizon or something like
That's definitely true, but I think another important distinction to make, though, is that I don't think that the average passerby playing games is caring about this, isn't looking for a new IP from these teams, because ultimately, for as much as Horizon is a series that has such a fundamentally different perception and sales reality. How about
and critical reality?
People love Horizon, except when you're talking to PlayStation fans who hate the oversaturation of Horizon, right? Yeah. So if we're even just thinking about a more hardcore in-group, there is no doubt a different treatment of Nintendo, I think, on the whole. And I also wonder if it's just a component of this is that people have grown up with these characters and don't want to see them go. I think I think Nintendo's curation of brand and IP is just so much better than what anybody else does in the industry. I mean, they're so careful about quality. They're so careful about multimedia. I think about a franchise like Halo, which is beloved to a lot of people and as synonymous, because this is almost a different conversation, but I don't know if there's one IP as synonymous with PlayStation as Mario is with Nintendo or Halo with Xbox.
Yeah, because there's always changes.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, Crash for PS1, God of War probably for PS2, Uncharted for PS3, into Last of Us for PS4. I guess Horizon maybe for PS4, and then PS5, yet to be determined. Concord, I guess.
Yeah, probably Concord. Maybe the mask from Midnight
Astro,
Murder Club.
Probably.
They wanted to be Astro.
Yeah,
but Yeah, I don't know. Halo has had pound for pound so many fewer games than
Yeah.
something like a
Hmm.
Mario. If you think about it, in the period of from the end of 2023 through to the start of this year, if you're speaking broadly about what constitutes a Mario game, there've
Yeah,
been
yeah,
more Mario Universe games released in that period than there almost have been Halo
yeah.
titles in the last almost
Ever.
20 years
Well, if you just say
or
since the release
25
of
years.
Halo Infinite, there's been more Mario games released than there have ever been Halo
Yeah,
games.
that's a good place to that's a good way to frame it. And so
Yeah.
I
Why'd you choose 2023?
well, just because
I
I have my
know.
eye
That's when the
for this.
Mario things.
Yes,
Yeah,
and so I don't know. Because I think about myself also. I think about
yeah. Wow.
as we're looking at the release of Switch 2,
Yeah.
and I'm excited to have another Animal Crossing, and
Yeah,
I'm
of course.
excited to have another of insert series. But it's there's a dissonance in my mind between that and PlayStation,
Hmm.
wherein I look at all this PlayStation stuff and I have no interest really.
Yeah, yeah.
I just say,
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I think another
Yeah,
difference, not only, I think the main difference is your personal affinity
yeah,
for specifically the currently relevant IP from each of those different production teams. You are much stronger Nintendo fan for Nintendo's IP than you are for PlayStation, which you have a deep history with PlayStation, but you're less of a personal fan of,
certainly true.
particularly God of War, Horizon, and Spider Man, which are the three biggest IP that they're currently working on. If they and when they announce the next, well, Naughty Dog game, you're very excited for
Yeah,
Intergalactic, or like the next Uncharted. You're a good fan of Uncharted. Like you'll play those games and probably enjoy
I'm
them a
very
lot
excited.
and be very excited for them. But outside of your personal affinity, I think another element that I've always given credit Nintendo a lot of credit for is they're much more willing to experiment within their series
Yeah,
than anyone else. And what it means is that each entry in a series, number one, because they don't usually connect narratively, there's not the requirement to play a game before you play its sequel in almost any regard for Nintendo, and even when it is true of something like Tears of the Kingdom or Galaxy 2, like, or Majora's Mask, like,
it's not even
like,
that relevant.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's not really relevant. Which is definitely something that, actually, I think in the narrative consistency, or the narrative consistency in Halo games, in Sony's
yeah,
IP, versus Nintendo's, which, as we just said, don't really have, I think also translates to their willingness to experiment on a gameplay level. Is when any Mario game or any Zelda game can be a Link, a version of Mario. It doesn't matter. This isn't a character who has a history. You don't have to worry about character relationships or locations, particularly. What it means is that on a map design basis, on an ability basis, on a character visual identity basis, you can experiment as much as you want. You can make a fucking Toon Link if
yeah.
you wish. You can make a paper Mario if you damn desire, but you can't make a paper Nathan Drake. You can't make you can make a Lego
Well,
Aloy.
and that's I was literally about to say that because it
Yeah.
again it draws into question another difference. Why was that not? Because that game was broadly uninteresting, right?
Yeah, Lego Horizon,
Yeah.
yeah.
It obviously
I paid $60 for
you
it.
did, you did, but you enjoyed your time.
That's a
You enjoyed your time with it.
Yeah, it's a good enough game. That's fine.
Because the reason I think about that one is because I don't just think that these changes are enough. I think
For what? Sorry, to lead to what we're talking about, the
yeah,
difference?
I think that
Sure.
again, I'll put myself in the conversation. Over the last year and change, we've had so many different Mario RPGs. We've had so many different Mario
Yeah.
series universe remasters and things. I look at these and they all feel very flattened. I think something that Nintendo is usually way better at than they have been recently, something that PlayStation is certainly not very good at, is treating a breadth of IP all with an equal level of importance that
Hmm.
invites a sense of variety that I don't think
Sure.
these other stables of IP have. If
Yeah,
if
sure.
you think about a year,
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a much stronger delineation of tiers from
yeah,
other companies. You think of Ubisoft, which series do they care about? Yeah, really Far Cry, Rainbow, Tom Clancy, and Assassin's Creed.
Yeah.
Everything else is kind of just a footnote.
If you look at a year like 2023, which I still contend is maybe Nintendo's best year ever,
Yeah, oh, totally.
there's such a breadth of IP, but also think about the emphasis. The emphasis placed on Pikmin 4 was massive. A game like Metroid Prime Remastered was not marketed particularly strongly, but it was still given a portion of time where it was able to sit and be important and be a big headline coming out of a direct.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that one I'll give you. I'll halfway extend the eligibility, so I'll take it back because I'm like that released like Shadow dropped like 2 weeks before Kirby came out. So let's be a little bit categorical here.
Okay, that's fine. Even just thinking about Pikmin then.
Yeah.
Obviously, they had a big Mario game, they had a big Zelda game, but they had a Pikmin game that they treated with a lot of importance. And I'll frame it this way more effectively. Around these things, they had a Metroid at the start of the year.
Yeah.
They had a
Fire Emblem.
They had a Fire Emblem. They had a F-Zero, right? F-Zero and WarioWare.
Pikachu.
All of this stuff was spread out across the year quite well. It all gets a big push. It's all in these series people love. I don't think that happens with PlayStation, right? We just played Midnight Murder Club, which I don't think is a particularly remarkable game by any stretch of imagination, but clearly PlayStation doesn't either.
No,
right?
They don't. And here's an interesting thing, because I know what you're getting at, is that on a marketing level, especially recently, we have seen PlayStation put out a slate of new IP that they aren't actually seemingly very interested in putting a ton of marketing value behind. We saw that with Helldivers 2, actually. Early last year, they didn't care that much about that game, and it was really only the community that made that game the success that it was. But Concord suffered the same fate, and Midnight Murder Club is suffering that fate even harder. And Lego Horizon Adventures showed up at SGF and in one Nintendo Direct, but otherwise, they didn't really seem to push the game very hard. And it does lead to not only decreased sales because there's decreased awareness of these releases, but it also, especially if you're in the in-group and you are aware of these titles, it is obvious that they don't care as much about this game versus the other game. And it makes you feel like, well, this is kind of just like an extra thing for them that they're not that interested in. Why should I care?
Yeah, and I guess really the heart of this dialogue I've been having in my head is this difference between the expectation from the player base and the reality of what's releasing. Because if you look at PlayStation over the last year and let's include this here, what's forthcoming, they've released a lot of new IP or a lot of had a lot of novel strategic exclusive partnerships to bolster that even further. When you think about Nintendo, in all likelihood, we'll do a separate predictions video. This isn't me trying to get into predictions here, but we're going to see a 3D Mario game. Obviously, we're going to see Mario. We're going to see more Mario Kart. We're going to see Metroid Prime 4, and then I think we'll see an EPD 5 game, a Splatoon, or an Animal Crossing, and then an EPD 4 game. Of that lineup,
that direct sounds too good. I can't get in on that. It sounds too good.
I mean, but it'll be some amount. It'll be probably 5 games along those lines. In all likelihood, the only one of those that's going to be new or surprising in some significant way will be the EPD4 game.
Definitely.
And then we have PlayStation and we have Xbox as well, really pushing new IP, pushing smaller teams.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it gets so much less motion. Yeah. Like imagine if Nintendo had a Midnight Murder Club analogous game, right?
Yeah.
I think that there'd be so much more interest in that as well. I think that people are invested in a way in Nintendo that they're not invested in the others. I think Nintendo is just treated so differently. And I think that as we're sitting here waiting for the Switch 2, I'm kind of wondering about that more.
Yeah.
People want Smash Brothers again. They want
of course.
They want Mario again. People are already talking about
they want 3D Kirby. They want Pikmin 5. They want Metroid Prime 4. They want Mario Kart 10. They want
the next Zelda already. People want the next Zelda. Yeah. They either want Ocarina.
My brother in Christ, we just got 2 brand new Zeldas within the last 2 years. Shut the fuck up.
So, what's the root difference here? I really think that the root difference is that these franchises are maybe Nintendo's franchises are not intrinsically better, but I think they become
Yeah,
intrinsically more special to people than any of these other
sure.
series. I think as a function of their age, a function of the
Hmm.
perennial reinvention, and I think just a function of the fact that you project so much more into them than you can into these other series that
Hmm.
want to tell
Oh,
you a
sure.
clearer story, want
Definitely.
to, be these big blockbuster things for everyone. I think that like at every level of Nintendo's business, from the amount of games they put out to the ways in which they'll market so many more of equal importance when they shouldn't be. Think about all the marketing Donkey Kong Country Returns HD has gotten this year.
Yeah, I can't even. I don't. If you were
Yeah,
just going by amount of social media presence, that would be the biggest game they've ever made.
yeah. Think about
And it's kind of a half-ass port from a fucking
yeah.
M tier team.
Think about the bespoke marketing campaign that Emio, the Smiling Man, got.
Oh sure, yeah.
Nintendo's just playing a different game. And I
Hmm.
think they have captured people in a different way. And I think an easy
Yeah.
answer is to simply say that it's just nostalgia recycling. But I don't know if that's necessarily true. Do you think that that's fair?
Um. Hmm. I think that it's a healthy balance
Yeah.
of that because I think that is certainly an element, and we particularly have criticized Nintendo for leaning into nostalgia to ham-fistedly
Yes.
in the past. They're like over reliance on using the Mario One sprite and a bunch of stuff, over reliance on using the Kanto starters in Pokemon. Like there are certainly some things that they love to lean in on, and it can be like blatant
Yeah.
nostalgia pandering at a certain point. But I think the great thing about Nintendo is that they utilize the nostalgia for most of their series by, I would say for the most part, putting them out at a regular enough cadence where people are then hungry for the next one, which I think definitely helps them not feel like they're milking the IP in the same way. You get one Mario Kart per console. You get one major Zelda per console usually. These things are expected to come once a generation, and so you're interested to see
Yeah.
not only what the next one because it's been a long enough time, but also the other thing, and this goes back to Nintendo being more willing to be flexible with their IP, is reinventing it each time. And so, to a certain extent, many of Nintendo's biggest series that have had reinventions could have been a new IP because they are different
Yeah.
enough from the previous iterations of their games to where if you reskinned it, it would feel like a totally different and totally different IP within a largely similar genre. Imagine if it was fucking Rocky the Moon Guy in Mario Galaxy, and
Right.
this was Nintendo's new thing, and it was a 3D platformer, but there's orbital gravitation. Your mind is never going to go, oh, this is a ripoff of Mario, because it's not. No game had controlled that way or had that sort of level design until Mario Galaxy. If Breath of the
Yeah.
Wild had been a new open world Nintendo IP and not a Zelda game, you would have never been like, oh, they're just retreading Zelda. Because Breath of the Wild is nothing like Twilight Princess, nothing like Skyward Sword. These are totally different games, and it's because Nintendo realizes that there is a value in, from the ground up, reapproaching the design of your games each time that allows each one to not only stand on its own but feel basically like a new IP and
Yeah.
have that surprise and delight factor because there isn't the commitment to um, necessarily building on the exact same framework. You think about a lot of these continual IP from other franchises. There's a lot more asset or mechanic or map reutilization that Nintendo only sees on occasion, but you will you will remember the exact slicing animation in Assassin's Creed because they used it for 4 games, or of course something like Uncharted. You see the characters grow, and those games don't have like map reutilization or anything, but they certainly only slightly grow mechanically between entries because they were made 2 to 3 years apart. And so there's just this different kind of
Yeah.
cadence and willingness to reinvent that Nintendo has that lets each new entry in a series feel fresh. I'm excited for Mario Kart 9 because it's been 10 years since Mario Kart 8. Of course, that's a long enough time between games, but also because I am very confident that even though we didn't see it in the 3-second teaser of Switch 2, that there is something that they're not showing us about that game that will make it a marked reinvention worthy of 10 years of development time. And I don't feel that way about Gran Turismo 8. I can predict what Gran Turismo 8 is going to be. I can predict what Forza Horizon 6 is going to be. But I don't know what Nintendo will do to Mario Kart 9 to make it feel very different. But I'm very confident that it'll be there because they have been willing to make those reinventions in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think the benefit of that also is if you look at their biggest thing. Let's look at 3D Mario. It's the most ambitious iteration of their most iconic character.
Yeah.
The 3D Mario series is a cross-generationally beloved thing. Yeah. But the experience of playing 64 versus Galaxy, which is what I grew up with, as you're saying, is radically different.
Versus Sunshine versus 3D Mario versus Odyssey.
Right. And it's not only just that they are fun it's not just fun to look at the continuity and change. It's not just aspirational, I think, on a design level to reinvent like that. It also gives a series like 3D Mario a continually new flavor that that makes that series mean something different to new generations of people. And I think that twist is important for keeping people always coming back. It's nostalgia, but it's new. I think about Star Wars, which I love, but tries to recapture the same feeling every time, right? Yeah. The nostalgia pandering in Star Wars is narrow. They are narrowly trying to recreate the feel of watching the original trilogy for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think what Nintendo does that's smart is that the touchstones are always there. There's the same joyous feeling to moving around as Mario, but the actual way you're moving is different. The places you're moving through are different. It's sort of it evokes that nostalgia, but it is fresh. And I think that emotional experience is part of why Nintendo's IPs are so successful. So it's, as you're saying, a design thing, which I totally agree with, but it also think about their idea of surprise and delight. And the GOAT Nintendo forecast always brings us back into conversation, which I think is important to do. Surprise and delight, it's nostalgia, but it's surprising. Yeah. And I think that's really key. And your Gran Turismo example is great, right? Because you can draw a straight line from GT1 to GT7.
Yeah.
There's basically no change. Right? It's all in pursuit of the same idea. It's all in the pursuit of sim racing. Now, that's a little bit different, right? Because that's trying to emulate and get closer and closer and closer to really being in that car.
Yeah.
But if you look at Horizon Zero Dawn and then you look at Horizon...
If I was a Gran Turismo player, I'd just say I can just go outside and get in a real car.
You look at...
Simulate driving by going to do your fucking errands. Go to the dentist.
And do it at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah. You'll get it done fast.
When you're looking at Horizon, even take a more recent example, they're polishing that same stone. It's the same. It's the same thing. Now that's reductive, of course, but Horizon Forbidden
with 2 games.
Horizon Forbidden West is a bigger, prettier version, a more refined, and an expansive version of all the same tenets, very similarly.
Definitely.
Let's think about Splatoon, because I think that Splatoon also raises an interesting point of discussion here. Because if we're talking about Nintendo in-group for a second, I think that there is a feeling that Splatoon has become tired. And we saw it a lot with Splatoon 3.
Yeah, definitely. I remember just from some schmucko on the internet a couple weeks ago getting me talking about how cool Nintendo's IP are. I don't know. Yeah. I do this on occasion. And someone was like, what? No one likes Splatoon 3. That's one of the most divisive, least loved games. I'm like, what are you talking about? And I said that mostly because I wasn't aware of this, but there definitely is a vocal, well, not particularly vocal because I don't hear that often, but there definitely is a passionate anti-Splatoon 3 audience online that feels that it is because it is so similar to Splatoon 2, that why did they stop Splatoon 2? Why didn't they just keep updating that game? Why did they even bother doing a whole new release for $60 and that kind of stuff? And I don't agree with those sentiments, but it's certainly the only, or one of the few Nintendo examples where people levy that particular criticism against one of their series.
Yeah, I mean, because I don't think that team in EPD5 has ever really taken the time
No.
to
Yeah,
reimagine Splatoon.
of course.
And Splatoon I would consider to be among my maybe 5 favorite Nintendo series, period.
Yeah, sure.
But even if I'm staring down this showcase in a couple weeks from Nintendo, and I'm thinking, okay, if EPD5 is going to be here, both EPD5 teams have kind of waited a while now on the cadence for Splatoon. It's not that impossible to imagine one could be
Yeah,
revealed
yeah.
this year. It's certainly not impossible to imagine Animal Crossing be revealed this year. Um, but I would really want it to be Animal Crossing, not Splatoon. And I
Yeah,
think that this speaks to what you're saying. Even though Animal Crossing, while I love that IP, it's an IP I love less than Splatoon by some good margin.
yeah.
There's a mystique that's been growing because of the time between entries, and I think there's also an
Yeah.
expectation and an understanding that that next game is going to be in some way fundamentally different. And it's going to remind me of loving playing New Leaf. And it's going to remind me of all
Yeah.
this feeling and memory of time with my sister that I associate with Animal Crossing. But it's also going to be new, and it's going to be fun and different. And I think
Yeah, it's interesting because in comparison to Splatoon, that is true.
Yeah.
But Animal Crossing is also in the top 3 or 4 most consistent Nintendo franchises in terms of
100%.
structure, in terms of visual identity, in terms of characters and concepts and design, just on like a gameplay level. You've been digging holes and putting fossils in your pockets and fishing in a
Yeah.
ocean since Dobutsu no Mori on fucking
N64,
no Animal.
yeah.
Yeah, on N64, yeah. Those games actually have not changed very much. And it wasn't until New Horizons, which is the biggest reinvention in the series, that franchise got its quote-unquote market reinvention. But even then, within a relatively limited scope. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of direction their next game takes in terms of following either the wildly popular and successful New Horizons format that did reinvent that franchise and maybe staying that course, or finding a balance or harmony between the New Horizons direction
Sure.
that gained that series popularity and returning it more to its roots. We have no idea yet, but that gives it some mystique. But to be honest, and I wasn't really a massive Animal Crossing fan prior to New Horizons. I liked New Leaf quite a bit, but before New Horizons and the idea that you could terraform and put things outside and stuff, which I think really did reinvent why I liked that series. I could between 2013 and 2019 or whenever that game was revealed first, I could have probably said, yeah, it's going to just be a prettier version of New Leaf, and I would have been mostly right.
But I think that also speaks to the difference of where we're at having this conversation. It goes back to what I raised earlier, because
moment.
also if you think back to that period, right? If we're in that sort of 2010s era, there was not that sense of innovation in any of these IP. This is the era of New Super Mario Brothers, right? This is the era of a lot of very safe sequels. Even A Link Between Worlds, a game that we both love, is trading on the basis of A Link to the Past, basically entirely. It's a remix version of that map. Donkey Kong is a sequel, right?
Yeah.
Pikmin, we had to wait a long time for Pikmin 3, but Pikmin 3 is just Pikmin again, right?
Yeah. And then it's not until Pikmin 4 that then... Well, and let's talk about the moment and the differences between, if we were talking Wii U era versus now. The reason I think a lot of people are more hungry for sequels and continuations is because it very much is in the you're only as good as your last game philosophy.
That's a great point.
Within the Wii U generation, there were a lot of entries and series that people liked, but that weren't very exciting and certainly didn't grab wider audiences. Not the case at all with the Switch era. We have gone on record many times, as of many people, talking about how many of Nintendo's series have been reinvented into certain degrees that bring in new fan bases and reignite fervor for them. Obviously, you see that with with 3D Zelda. You see that with going open world Pokemon, 3D Kirby, a little more expansive Fire Emblem, Mario Wonder
Yeah,
revitalizing
Pikmin,
2D Mario. Yeah,
Mario
Pikmin.
Sports. I mean, there's way more series that have rather than have not seen some sort of fundamental change in this era,
Yeah,
and I think that's a really key point because it's actually something else that I really admire about the GameCube era. If we're looking historically, right?
sure. Oh yeah,
Sunshine, Wind Waker. If you
yeah.
look at the
Prime.
Prime, so many Nintendo franchises got Kirby Air Ride. There was a sense, which is a
Yeah,
little bit different, right? Because
yeah, of course.
there were going to be more traditional Kirby games. They got canceled. We ended up getting Air Ride.
Yeah,
But the point is, there have been these periods of time into the Wii era as well, where these next entries are going to be in some way fundamentally different. You could have just made another Super Mario 64, but instead we get Mario Sunshine.
yeah,
And that wasn't true for a window of time when we were growing up.
yeah.
There was a conservative period in that if we're thinking of, for the sake of this, looking at the Wii era more broadly as encapsulating Wii and Wii U, there was a sense of real continuity. So when Wii U gets announced and the launch game is another 2D Mario, New Super Mario Bros. Title that looks identical to what we'd already been playing,
Yeah.
there was an expectation set of this real sense of fatigue that I don't think
Definitely.
Nintendo had before to the same degree, and I
Yeah.
think finally broke out of again with Switch. So I think that's another key point you're making.
Yeah. And what'll be very interesting to see is how that sort of follow-up mentality
Yeah.
is approached with Switch 2 sequels to Switch reinvention games. It is very possible that we get follow-ups to reinvention Switch era games
Yeah.
that are not reinventions within themselves that end up feeling sort of samey. I'm not confident that we necessarily would get a Super Mario Wonder 2, but it's possible. And if it looks quite similar and uses the Wonder Flower mechanic, I'm sure that game will be great in the way that Super Mario Bros. New Super Wii and U and 2 were, but it would be a less exciting game than Super Mario Bros. Wonder was. And honestly, like we might be looking down the barrel of a number of those if we get Prime 4, amazing new, like, been so long since the original, and if we get Prime 5, 3 or 4 years later, how different is that really than New Super Mario Bros. 2 on 3DS versus New Super Mario Bros. Wii? Is a similar, same engine, same structure follow-up to a game. Things come and go in booms and busts. I will say, though, that I'm not that worried about it because Nintendo already went through this and they saw the not benefits, the deficits that playing it too safe in the Wii U era caused them. And I think learning from those mistakes, while we are getting an iterative sequel to this system, I don't think necessarily that we will get a direct follow-ups like New Super U was, because Nintendo saw that wasn't the kind of thing that really drew people in. So I think that maybe it'll be a better balance this time.
Well,
hopefully.
let me bring PlayStation back into conversation here then, because something we've talked about before is that this idea that in some ways PlayStation is almost in the same generation now that they were in like 2018 or 2017, that the back half of the PS4 generation was fundamentally different than the front half of the PS4 generation, and that end of PS4 and first half of PS5 are functionally the same philosophy guiding them.
Yeah, it's kind of true. Yeah.
And you could make an argument that that's not that far afield from Wii and Wii U. The continuity of those ideas.
Well, because Wii U only had half a generation.
Also true. But if we look at these examples, more so PS4 to PS5, because the development tools were so similar there, whereas the jump into Wii to Wii U is obviously fundamentally changed certain things about how Nintendo made their games. But if we're looking at Switch 2 as a continuity in hardware and likely a continuity in large part in development process, I think that there is a chance that it is iterative to the point where they enter a PlayStation style reputation inside their hardcore. Because even think about Tears of the Kingdom. Think about the I don't even know what the right word is. How about infighting? About
Yeah.
about Tears of the Kingdom as as a masterpiece in its own context, or a disappointment in the context of being in some key ways too similar to Breath of the Wild.
Sure.
Now
Yeah.
imagine that the next 3D Kirby is functionally very similar to Forgotten Land.
Yeah. It
Imagine
probably will be.
Pikmin 5 will be very functionally
Yeah.
similar to Pikmin
Probably
4.
will be.
Start
Yeah.
and start adding these up, right?
Yeah.
We know that Aonuma is not backing away from Aonuma and Fujibayashi are not backing away from the open air format.
Yep.
And so what happens when the first big 3D Zelda on Switch is in some important ways so similar to the other two on Switch 1?
Yeah.
Is that not going to put them in the same position
I think it will,
that
yeah.
PlayStation ended up in with Horizon or Ragnarok or insert any other series, Spider-Man? I think that there's
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that there's a chance that suddenly, for production reasons, for brand continuity reasons, for in some ways Nintendo is more conservative right now in the risks they're taking. There's a chance that they end up in a lane where the community is once again a little dissatisfied, a little bit more like the PlayStation community.
I think that is definitely possible, and something I think people maybe aren't ready to admit, the ways in which these booms and busts can swing very suddenly, depending on the types of games that are coming out. Again, you're only as good as your last game, and it isn't necessarily to say these upcoming games, even if they are samey, would be bad, but the Wii U games that people were disappointed in weren't bad games either. They were just very similar. New Super U and 3D World are very good games in their own right. Tropical Freeze is a game that people love. All these games were just very similar, iterative sequels to the games that came just a couple of years before. And that is something that I try my best to divorce myself from the sort of like emotional reaction of overreacting, I guess, to something being either too similar or too different, because there can be over emotional reactions to either one of those. But I find myself pushing to find as much value as I can in iterative sequels, because as someone who spends a lot of time learning about the industry and development processes, I know that a lot of iterative sequels are made that way for very particular reasons that are mostly on development level or producer level. Of like, okay, well, this was very successful. Let's see where we can build from that going forward, even if it does largely maintain that same energy. And which is why I find myself defending, and it feels to me a lot of the time defending against massive hordes, defending games like Spider-Man 2 and Ragnarok and Tears of the Kingdom, and these games that are iterative sequels building very strongly off of foundations, in each case reusing maps, reusing combat engines, things like that, because I recognize that from each of those teams, that was something that they needed to do to polish up what they were doing the first time. In a couple of scenarios, well, actually in all those scenarios, continue the story forward and but still do what they could within each within their breadth to try something new, to add the wingsuit to Spider-Man 2, to add the spear to God of War Ragnarok, to add fucking everything.
Now, I had to push back on that. You're here talking about how great the wingsuit is, but where were you when they added the acorn suit to New Super Mario Brothers U?
Excellent
It's
point.
The same
I'm
fucking
hypocrite.
thing.
I'm a hypocrite.
No, I think you're totally right, and it has me reflect a little bit about what are some of my most anticipated unannounced games right now. Metroid Prime 5, Pikmin 5, right?
Yeah.
And I'm being facetious a little bit because obviously there's
Splatoon 4.
Yeah, I'm being facetious a little bit, but the point is, there is a benefit.
If there was a Nintendo year coming up that was Pikmin 4, a Tropical Freeze sequel, Splatoon 4, Luigi's Mansion 4, Mario Kart 9, it'd be the best year that you'd ever lived through in your entire life.
True. It's very true.
and you can easily imagine each of those games being, having a couple of new ideas, but not being massive reinventions for their series. Also because it's very difficult to massively reinvent your series. Sometimes it's simply not possible within the development time of a game to massively reinvent the idea. Like, I think that every team would want their games to be totally different if they could. But sometimes that's not possible. Whether or not it's because of budget constraints or production constraints, or just because you come up with a totally new idea for a game when you make.
Because that's true, but I think the inverse is also true, and I think that people don't appreciate this either. Sometimes they want the sequel to be more of the same because they had ideas that couldn't
definitely
be executed on, right?
Many such cases.
And so this is where I ultimately find myself wondering about my past life as a younger boy, right?
Yeah, they made a movie about that.
They did. It is a very good movie. I used to be...
Card in the Corner, I guess. I don't know.
Card in the Corner to the trailer for Past Lives.
Yeah, sure.
I find myself thinking back to when I was so frustrated at times when I more in high school, mostly because my life was way worse and I was unhappy. but also, looking at ports or iterative sequels coming out of Nintendo and being frustrated because it wasn't there wasn't that twist wasn't there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now I don't feel that way. My life is way better. I'm way more happy. But also, I think that this is where the other engine ignites, right?
Definitely.
Of
the other appeal.
The other appeal is simply that I love these characters. I love these worlds. I want more of them.
Yeah.
And it returns back to the first thing you said, right? There's so many people that feel the way that I feel, but God of War about insert any Nintendo franchise.
Definitely, yeah.
And I guess Nintendo's, their best defense against that is simply the fact that these IP have been around so long and they have so much cultural significance in the world of gaming that they can just tank it, right? This is what people always go back to in the Wii U era. Nintendo...
Yeah, sure. They can tank it. By which tank it is like, I don't know, fucking 300 people who weren't going to buy a game anyway whine online.
Or even if the overall majority of people don't, people always say about the Wii U era is Nintendo still had cash in the bank. Yeah. When they sold 4 million copies of a game on Wii U, most AAA studios would literally kill their executives would kill their own children to sell that many units, right? And I think that there is a reality that a lot of Nintendo fans don't walk the walk that they might talk.
Okay, sure.
Hey,
how do you mean?
I'll use myself as an example. I remember
you can walk.
I remember being 17 in the year 2018, right?
Yeah.
And saying, "Oh, Kirby Star Allies, that's just so lame. That's just it's just the same thing that we got from Return of Dreamland through Triple Deluxe through Robobot. It's just the same thing again. I don't even want it. I had it on day one, right?" Yeah. There is, I think, part...
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I think part of the answer to the question I'm talking about, particularly if we're thinking about the in group of Nintendo fans, how do these IP manage to stay around and keep our attention? Because we've loved them since we were 4, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is a part of the equation that can't be overlooked. If people grew up with Horizon, I think it would be different. I think that series would have a different perception.
Yeah.
But
it's also about, at a certain point, it goes back to my point of going from being milked to being a mainstay.
Yeah.
Because, and that isn't to say that there aren't people who will say long-running series are being milked. There's still plenty of people who say that sort of thing. But there becomes the expectation that this is just something that is part of the market, and you take it for granted. You're like, well, there's gonna be a new Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, Pokemon, Mario Kart. Like, this is gonna happen.
Because there's also people that just want to make that. And that's, I think, another thing that people don't appreciate, right? Like, I'm sure that working at... Actually, I was going to say I'm sure working at Guerrilla is a great job, but the more I think about it, I'm sure that working for any PlayStation City right now is probably a nerve-wracking experience. But if you find yourself in a role where you're just making the same thing and you love it, that's great. And I feel like sometimes people might think, everybody at Guerrilla is like slaving away because Big Sony wants another Horizon game. I think that's
90% of Guerrilla employees just want to make a new Killzone, but they're not allowed to.
Yeah, it's like I just watched a video the other day of this woman who every day for 31 years has been weighing piano keys on Steinways in New York, and she loves it. That's all she wants to do with her
Weighing
life.
them?
Yeah,
What
so
does that mean?
you have to like put little weights on every key on the piano to make sure there's a right level of resistance when you push it down. Like her
Whoa.
whole job every day for 31 years is wearing these keys
Yeah.
out, and she
Yeah.
loves it. There's a lot of people that are like that in the world. And they want to just
Yeah.
make these games and they love these worlds and they feel ownership over them. They want to make them bigger and better and push them
Yeah.
forward. And so there's also, I think, a responsibility as a player to really understand every reason why a sequel is the way that it is. It's always going to be business related reasons. There's always going to be pragmatic reasons. There's always going to be artistic reasons. It's always a combination of all of the three.
Hmm.
And I think that when you appreciate that, you can put into context any of these sequels, right?
Definitely.
Ghost of Yote, right? I thought Ghost of Tsushima was great. My mind says, I don't know if I want to just do that all over again. But in
Hmm.
reality, that's a big IP. That's something people have been waiting for. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people at Sucker Punch who are really passionate about getting back into that world
Yeah.
and figuring out what they could do with it that they couldn't do in the base game or Legends or Iki Island. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that ultimately there's no real point to this discussion, but I think that it's just
Welcome to Backlog Banter, ladies and gentlemen.
I think that largely people just want to play Nintendo games. And I think that they've been conditioned as we've been conditioned to drink water, right? They've been conditioned to want to play Nintendo games, and that's probably the answer I'm looking for. But I don't know. I'll probably keep pondering this.
Well, yeah, I mean, the final thing that I kind of want to touch on is from your side,
Yeah.
as someone who admittedly is very interested in doing more of the same, and not necessarily in
Yeah.
a negative way, but in you find comfort in that repetition. You play a lot of Halo or Mario Kart, which you've done for years and years, and
Yeah.
the experience doesn't change, but you find comfort and harmony and in inner peace from that repetition, and you'd be excited for a direct sequel to any of these games that you can just continue to do more of the same in. Where you think that line is drawn for you, and why that causes some games that you love for you not to be particularly excited for a sequel? I mean,
Yeah.
like I remember you and I playing Spider-Man Miles Morales, and you being a good size fan of that game.
Yeah.
You're like, I thought it was a lot better. You said that you thought it was a lot better than the 2018 game.
Yeah.
And then you played like an hour and change of Spider-Man
And
2.
I got on a bicycle and I stopped.
What? Oh, well, yeah, there are those sections, yes.
Yeah.
But there are certainly some games that are similar or direct sequels to games that you are a fan of that you don't end up being as particularly invested in. I think the answer is probably your tastes have changed in between. You're in a different place in your life.
Yeah.
But is there anything you think? Is that ever something you sort of like a wonder within yourself of like, why do I want iterative sequels to some things but not others?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly why I've been thinking about this topic, right? In addition to what I was mentioning before, with this sort of feeling of a dichotomy between Nintendo and PlayStation in particular. But as I'm thinking about Switch 2, I find myself often in a position in my own mind where, like, what I want and what I think is, like, creative, like, put it to you this way, clearest way I can put it. What's most sort of creatively interesting is not necessarily what I'm interested in.
Sure.
And I think that this is broadly true across any medium, right?
Yeah.
I
it's obvious with your work, but
I watch a lot of movies, I listen to a lot of music, I play a lot of games, I read a fair amount of books. I'm not always looking for that experimentation, but I'm like, it should be there. And that's like something I have to, it's like a dissonance that I have to try to understand, right? And I think that's what I was trying to get at with this point, using Kirby Star Allies as an example. I think that this is broadly, particularly in the Nintendo community, a sort of, I think, a feeling that we should expect the next thing to be big and different and interesting and cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's not, that there's something wrong with that, but there isn't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Not inherently.
and so I just don't know how to receive that, because I think about Tears of the Kingdom. This is a great example for me. Breath of the Wild, among my favorite games ever. Tears of the Kingdom, I still think it's great, but I wouldn't put it in my top 50 games, right? Probably wouldn't. I don't even know if I'd put it in my top 100, but I'd put Breath of the Wild in my top 15, right? And so there's like a part of my mind that says, oh, man, I wanted something way, way different, right?
Yeah.
I wanted something way different, and I didn't get it.
Because a part of your issue with Tears of the Kingdom is that it was too similar, or that it was too
because it's
different?
like, well,
I can't quite remember.
Because I couldn't.
It's both.
Well,
Really.
it is both. It's an interesting case of a game that I think is fundamentally way more different than people give it credit for. But the point is, in part, I'm like, oh, I want something different. And then another part of my mind's like, oh, but I really like the last thing, so I get more of it, so that's cool. And I don't know where I sit ultimately. And
desk chair.
I do sit in a desk chair. But so when it comes to
just helping you out,
when it comes to Switch 2, part of me is like, well, is it going to be disappointing if we start seeing all these games and it's just the sequel to Switch 1 things? Is that going to be disappointing? Am I going to feel the way I feel about PS5, or am I going to love it? I don't know.
Well, here's an interesting thing that I can draw a clear delineation between Nintendo and Sony entering their next generation of an iterative hardware successor. Is that the problem with early PS5? Even as someone who liked a lot of the games, most of the games, almost all the games that they put out, the problem with early PS5 isn't that the games weren't good or that they should not have done iterative continuation sequels to these great games that they started with at the end of PS4, but is that they didn't have other things around them. It is very similar to the issue that you had with early last year when there was just only a bunch of Mario games, and you're like, where's the other stuff? And the problem isn't that insert the 5 different Mario games there are bad in their own right, but is that there isn't the other things that add sort of a variety to it that mildly disguise the fact that there is that there is a lot of sameness going on. That again, that's the problem with PS5, early PS5, is that there wasn't the other stuff. That's not going to be true with Switch 2. I don't think we're going to get a Tears of the Kingdom successor. At bare minimum, it's going to be a totally different map. They're not going to be using the same runes again. It might be a big open air world, but it's going to be probably a different art style because they've used that twice. Like, that game is not going to be a follow up in the way that Spider-Man 2 was. We're as we know, we're getting this test game that they've showed off last year that is a totally new IP that is totally different gameplay wise. Nintendo is always making partnerships and doing spin-offs, and there are so many series that they are supporting at once and they have the opportunity to revitalize things. If there's a new 2D Donkey Kong, it'll be the first 2D Donkey Kong in 10 years. So then it'll be a revitalization. They have so many irons in the fire, pots in the stove, that no matter I think it's very unlikely for them to end up in a similar position, even if we get a Pikmin 5 and Prime 5 and Mario Kart 9, and these things ultimately are quite similar. They're going to be those are the tentpole titles surrounded by a variety of more interesting things. You can think back to 2022, which I personally think is one of Nintendo's great years. The major games that year were all sequels to early Switch games. And nobody really complains about 2022. Even though we were seeing Splatoon 3 and the Booster Course Pass, and like we were getting all these very iterative follow-ups. But it was because there was Switch Sports, and there was Battle League, and there was I guess Fire Emblem Three Hopes is another iterative thing, but like they had a variety of different approaches that year, even if within that, and so I expect very much 2022 type years going forward of some major iterative things, but enough variety and innovation and revitalizations and things that make that feel like not as much of an issue as it was early PS5.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree to an extent. I mean, but if you think about that year also, like, Battle League wasn't very good.
Yeah, true.
Switch Sports wasn't very good.
Yeah.
Famicom Detective Club was cool, but sort of came and went. Metopia kind of came and went. When I think about that year,
Those are 21, but
no, I don't think so.
yeah, they are. I promise you. Metopia and Famicom Detective Club remakes, those were 2021.
Were they? What
Yeah.
else was 2022 then?
I actually have it pulled up
Oh,
here. Opened the year
yeah,
on Legends Arceus,
yeah,
Forgotten Land, Arceus and Forgotten Land, two massive
yeah,
reinventions of two big series. Switch Sports, iterative but so long ago that it's a revitalization. Battle League, same thing. Then we hit like a multi-peat of iterative things. Three
yeah.
Hopes, Xenoblade 3, Splatoon 3, Sparks of Hope, Bayonetta 3,
That's what it
and then
was.
Scarlet and Violet.
Right. So
Yeah,
20, I don't know why I had those in my head as 2022.
you're
2021 was not
wrong.
a very good year.
21? No,
But
I don't
I
think
got
it was.
Metroid Dread, so that's all I really needed.
Yeah,
And WarioWare, which I liked a lot.
that's a good game.
That's a good
Yeah,
game. Um, yeah. No, I think what Nintendo's challenge is going to be. I'll frame it
yeah,
this way to sort of to wrap it up. Is that I think their challenge is going to be trying to precisely understand why people liked Switch and why they liked that library and why these games were huge
sure.
and not taking the wrong lessons.
Yeah.
I think a game like Tears of the Kingdom arguably took some of the wrong lessons.
Hmm.
If we look at the immediate fall off in sales of that game,
Sure.
sort of they were chasing this virality and they were chasing
Yeah.
this framework, and that was great, and it resulted in a game that to many people is a real masterpiece of design, and in many ways it is. But it's certainly not the game with the staying power that Breath of the
Definitely.
Wild is. If we're thinking
Yeah.
even just purely along the lines of when people buy a Switch, what are they buying? They're buying Breath of the Wild.
100%. 100%. I think that's a great point in
Yeah.
that game was viral for a month. Then what?
And in that month, they sold 20 million units. And I don't think
Yeah.
anyone.
They made their money back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and no one's going to see that. But then what after that,
Yeah.
right? And so
Like a million.
I think that there's a worry in my mind
Yeah.
that it is not impossible to imagine a situation like Wii U, not anywhere near the same extent of fall off, but an extent in which they pin their future on the appeal only of the past, try to twist it a little bit and run with it, and they can't run as far as they could with Switch.
I think that's very possible.
And
yeah.
we've seen this time.
And you're right. I think that was the problem with Wii U.
Yeah,
Definitely.
they wanted so much continuity that the change became irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
It happened to lesser extent with Game Boy Advance. It happened to lesser extent with 3DS.
Yeah.
But whenever Nintendo has moved this has sort of piggybacked on a previously massively successful brand, it's not always worked out that well. Even Super Nintendo is a less successful system than the original, but not to any extent that it really matters. These other ones we're talking about examples of a 2-to-1 sales disparity or a 10-to-1 sales disparity, like 9-to-1. So I don't know. I just want them to avoid these pitfalls, and I think that there's a chance that this generation from Nintendo could be looked at in a similar way to PS5, which is not to say as a generation of failure. Indeed, the PS5 is a runaway success, but it's a generation of controlled success. And controlled success, I just don't think motivates these fan bases that we're a part of in the same way.
Sure. Yeah. And I think Nintendo, especially because of that surprise and delight factor, because of the value that a lot of people find in wondering what's coming next, because Nintendo has that history of trying something new, even within their own series. And the final question I want to ask you is, now that we've established all this stuff, especially about Switch 2 and how there is technically a little bit of worry going into next generation that I honestly hadn't really thought of before, but I think it's an interesting thing to bring up. But is, what do you think for you and how you will enjoy these games or enjoy the generation, if it ends up being a lot of follow-ups to Switch games that you love?
Yeah.
Do you think that will be an issue to you. Part of what I know you love so much about Wii era and GameCube era Nintendo, and also
And
Switch
Switch
era
era.
Nintendo,
Yeah.
is that there's a lot of willingness to reinvent. But you also are someone that, as we've
Yeah.
talked many times throughout this video, that you are totally fine and sometimes very excited for, and or prefer something that is a direct follow up. You'll put a lot of hours into a Splatoon 4. You'll put a lot of hours into a Mario Kart 9. That's basically the same as Mario Kart 8. Like that. That's just how you are. And so,
Yeah.
do you think that you would find it a disappointment if we go, let's just say, most of the way through Switch 2, and it is pretty consistent follow ups to Pikmin and Metroid 5 and Mario Kart 9 and these things?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if disappointment would be the way I'd frame it.
Yeah.
I think because again, I'll use the PlayStation again as an example quickly. PS4, I would say, is in my top 5 systems ever. I loved my PS4 so much. I'm really not a fan of my PS5 at all.
Yeah.
And I don't think that would be a similar situation for me from Switch 1 to Switch 2.
Yeah.
But I just think that when I love the Switch so much, it's not my favorite Nintendo system, but it's my top 3 easily. And I think by the time we get that final game, the final Switch 1 game, I could see it being my favorite.
Prime 4.
Well, it'd be ZA.
Oh, that's a good point. We actually know about one past that.
But I could...
Well, unless Prime 4 is December.
Or...
They said 2025.
Or the other thing could happen is that ZA could be... ZA could be May, and then Prime could be June, and then it could be done in June. Because they said late 2025 for ZA, but May is way later than February was. You understand that?
It didn't say later in 2025.
But what's the point I'm actually trying to make? I think that ultimately my expectations for Nintendo are so high right now. I think it's for a number of reasons that we've talked about and reasons we haven't. My lifelong love of their worlds and characters and gameplay styles, their unique excellence over the last many years, and their real fumbling of the last 18 months, right? In my view, sure. I think they've really fumbled the end of the generation. Now they've coasted on a lot of success, and coasting on success to me sounds a little bit like what PlayStation has been doing, in large part. And I think that if we get a Switch 2 that is just really good, I'll view it in that light. It'll be really good, and I'll have a lot of fun with it. But I don't think it would be as special. I don't think it'd be as meaningful to me or to the community or to the industry as Switch 1 was. And that's sort of what I'm anticipating out of this system.
I agree. Yeah. I definitely agree that will be more than likely that will be the sentiment. Yeah. If the generation goes the way that, if it very much is a continuation of Switch is, and we have nothing to base it off of now that is not going to be that.
Yeah.
The final thing is just for me. I think I'll be very interested in that because as I mentioned, pretty consistently am able to find value or personal value in building off of previous frameworks. I consistently find direct sequels for games or direct continuations of technology to be things that make improvements that make me prefer them over the originals. And even if that does come at quote unquote the cost of my reverence for the original work, that's fine by me. And so I'm excited for Switch 2, even if it does go down that track and it does end up disappointing people. I'm at the point in my life where I think I would personally find that very interesting. But I also don't think necessarily that I would prefer it. I would prefer that to be the way it goes. Yeah. So in some way, I guess it kind of would be a disappointment. But because I want it to be a new IP from every team every time. Is like and not like to such a huge degree, but like that would be so much more interesting. But at a certain point, I'm just excited to see what happens, especially because, as you mentioned, they've fumbled the last 18 months, and so I'm actually surprised at how easy it's been the last 18 months just to kind of coast by and be like, something will happen soon. But What it means is that we've had such a long down period of just
Yeah.
waiting. And the dam is about to break. As the time of recording, we are 10 days, I think, away from the Switch 2 Direct, which will give us a much better idea of the way that the first 6 months of the system's life are going to go, which I'm very, excited to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I'm not. I changed my mind. Fuck it. Not excited
Shit!
anymore.